Welcome to No Question About That. And today I am talking to John McNicholl, whose new book, Wem-ber-lee, is out now, about the 1989-90 season. For you young'uns, it's when Fergie almost got sacked. John, welcome to the show.
Cheers for having me on, Ed. Appreciate it.
Yeah. I haven't looked at the demographics, actually. I'm not quite sure how young the audience is versus, I suspect there's quite a few of us of this age. And
most definitely, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I remember this season really clearly. I went to a few games this season, but it was before my mum would let me go on my own. I know, so she went with my dad a few times. All right, let's talk about genesis of the book then. So the synopsis is about the first half of the book, kind of leads up to the 1989 season, potted history of United, sacking of Ron Atkinson, Fergie's arrival, and United finish 88 in 11th place, and so the pressure is on Fergie. And we sort of the second half of the book runs through the FA Cup fixtures through to the final at Wembley, which everyone kind of now it is law that saved Ferguson's job. So what was the genesis for you? Why this season of all the many?
I think I did a sort of a bit of research, and while there's books of certain seasons, and obviously there's a history, God knows how many history books of Manchester United there are about, and everyone's put their own little spin on it, and there's some fantastic publications out there. But I sort of really did struggle to find, because, like you say, every year people talk about when the FA Cup third round comes about, how Mark Robins saved Alex Ferguson's job away at Nottingham Forest, and it gets trotted out a lot. And I thought, I don't think there's actually any sort of books that I could find about that particular era, that period anyway. Obviously there's a lot of books of the successes after and a lot of books of the things before, but yeah, I couldn't find a great deal. I mean, someone might be able to say, oh, actually there's this, but I did have a bit of a rummage, but struggled to come up with too much. So thought it was a bit of a niche sort of time to go about, really.
Yeah. No, it's great. I mean, I really enjoyed it. It's nostalgia porn, isn't it? For some of us who are around, and maybe teaches the young ones something about it. I mean, the context is kind of interesting, because obviously it's by this time it's 22 years since United had won the title. Fergie's been brought in after Big Ron, who had a fair amount of success, but just couldn't, as you say in the book, couldn't really get United to the next level. Fergie comes in, he finishes second in one season, 13th and then 11th. And I mean, you couldn't really imagine it today, could you?
No.
There's no chance there's no chance a manager would last three seasons with that kind of record. But Martin Edwards, who I always think is kind of a bit maligned by history, probably in time we'll think actually he did all right by United, despite his various proclivities.
I mean, yeah, it was a lot more stable time back then. Obviously, he was looking to sell towards the end. He held on a little bit longer than what he probably wanted to, but once the money of the Premier League sort of started rearing its head, he probably thought there was a bit of a better time to stay around. But I mean, he was a pretty steady hand compared to nowadays. Obviously, he got it from his father, so it'd been a long line of like a succession, if you know what I mean. So it was in his blood, I would suggest. But yeah, it was a funny old time, and I just wanted to sort of, because the reason why I went so far back from the beginning and sort of started from day dot in a bit of a watered down history of a run up to the current proceedings was because, like you say, a lot of people, like younger people who might not generally know, without having to go and buy a book on the full history and getting bogged down by, and like I say, there's plenty out there. There's so many books out there. So I just sort of wanted to do a bit of a really watered down history, but just making sure that the big bits were obviously in there, so that people could see what was going on and how we literally got to that bit, because, 22 years without a top flight title, a relegation in that as well, because obviously they won the Division 2 title. So there was some silverware along the way, but obviously, as a football fan, your bread and butter's winning week in, week out, as far as I'm concerned. So, every year it was like, is this going to be the year we finally get one over the line? And Liverpool at the time, were winning left, right, and centre, and they were winning leagues and European Cups and just having a right good old time of it. And we were just, picking up the scraps, really. So it was a sort of long, drawn out process. I actually got one of the chapters I googled. I was trying to find a word to think of one of the titles of the chapters, and a fella helped me out on Twitter because I said, for anyone who's of a Man United persuasion of an older generation, how would you describe the years from 1970, from not winning the league in 68 or 67 and then not winning it again until, the Premier League era? And I said, how would you describe that? And someone said the Hunger Years, and I thought, that's brilliant. I'm going to use that. And I think it was, although there was plenty of cup runs and cup successes, it just showed that we were just so far off it on a day in, day out basis. But we could beat a team on our day, which obviously made it even more frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, cup runs through that period, obviously, 83, 85, 77, lost out in 76, 79, and League Cups in there as well, but just never close enough to the title. And I mean, if people think today is bad, then the lead up to 89 was even worse. I mean, I think the history it does well by it's for setting the context, how desperately that was needed. But it's in retrospect, it's a pivot point, isn't it? 1990, it's the point where things take off, and who knows? It's counterfactual. No idea what would have happened if he hadn't won, if United hadn't won that cup final. So let's go back to where we are, beginning of that season. There's the saga with Martin Edwards. He's trying to sell the club. Michael Knighton juggles the ball on the pitch, scores at the Stretford end in his now what looks like a fantastic tracksuit, retro and all of that,
Yeah.
Copy, yeah. And that's a giant media saga through the late summer to when did it all collapse in sort of October, November. So that's that. Although United spent heavily that summer in anticipation.
Well, I think this was the summer where Ferguson really started to put his stamp on the team, and they spent big, with the likes of Neil Webb and Mike Phelan, and Gary Pallister was a record British transfer, and then sort of they signed Danny Wallace from Southampton, so he was getting some real talent in from around the division. So it was hard for people to get their heads around why the season started in such a poor fashion. I mean, Brian Robson got injured quite early on, and as any United fan will tell you, my dad used to say, if Brian Robson played, United would more or less not lose, was his thing. But if he didn't, then they would struggle. Such was his importance, obviously. So he got injured quite early on in the season and missed a large chunk of it. So Neil Webb as well started off well, got injured for England, missed a large chunk of it. So that's your midfield gone. Your engine room. So there was injuries that season. There was a lot of injuries that especially some of the signings and things like that. So you could sort of have a little bit of leeway, but obviously now he would never have lasted. And even before the FA Cup, he'd probably have been gone. Finishing 11th the year before, he would probably have been sacked in October, like in this day and age.
Yeah, it's hard to see any club having that kind of patience, let alone one of the elite clubs, isn't it?
No.
So pretty poor results through the autumn, leading up to the FA Cup third round, which is away at Forest. I'm sure absolutely everyone has seen Hughes's ball to Robbins outside of the foot.
I mean, that ball itself is insane, because when you actually watch that back, he hits at the outside of his foot, just dupes it round between the fullback and the centre half, and it bounces up just right for Robbins to bend down and nod it past the Forest goalkeeper. I mean, it doesn't get talked about enough as an assist. Very similar to Brian Robson's 4 Hughes in the Cup Winners' Cup final against Barcelona. Just a little outside of the foot between the two. Very, very delicate. But it was a tough game, and to be honest, looking back at the highlights, because this season I was only 9 years old, so for a lot of I had the Road to Wem-ber-lee VHS video, which I basically wore out after the next year, watching it over and over again. But going back and looking at the highlights of this match, it was a very poor match in terms of quality from United. Forest obviously had a goal disallowed at the death for a foul on Jim Leighton, which was a bit, but that's the luck. That's the luck, right? That's the luck that obviously got them through, and away they went.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in fact, the whole run, it's hard to say that there was a high quality performance in any of these fixtures. So, what is it up next? It's Forest in January, then it's away at Hereford.
Yeah, then they travelled to Hereford, and that again a scrappy 1-0 win in the last 10 minutes on a pitch that resembled a absolute cow's field. Yeah, so again, you're playing a 4th division team, scraping through 1-0, but again, getting in a cup competition, it's about getting your name in the hat, and that's the aim of the game.
Yeah, and as United did throughout this run, go to St James's Park next, win there, Bramall Lane. I mean, they're all away from home, these games, aren't they, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, it was until City did it, I think, in 2018. It was the first time a team had ever got to Wembley without playing a home game.
That's right. And then the double header against Oldham, some classic goals that people will remember in that one as well. And then Palace beating Liverpool in the other semi-final.
Yeah, I think that day was just incredible. I think I always tell when you sort of talk to people regarding, your first bits of football, and I remember they had the games were back to back on a Sunday afternoon. So they had Crystal Palace Liverpool with a 12 o'clock kickoff, United with the 3:30 after EastEnders. And I just remember sitting with my dad, and we watched the Crystal Palace game, in which he'd said to me before kick-off that Liverpool were going to thrash Crystal Palace. They obviously did not, so that was a big upset. And then the United Oldham game was just strap yourself in again. We just swung both ways, and it was just unbelievable. Like it was crazy day of football, but it was so intense. After that, I was absolutely gripped, and then it went on to the semi-final replay, and then obviously the final was a similar outing as the semi-final.
Yeah, let's spend a bit of time on the final itself. I mean, the first one was 3-3, and Jim Leighton, who Ferguson had brought with him from Aberdeen and had been his sort of number one for the past few years, flaps at everything, as Jim was wont to do. Decent goalkeeper. Didn't like claiming crosses. It was no good with his feet. Yeah.
A lot of people tell me in his first season when he come down from Aberdeen, he played quite well. I'm not sure if that was the season when we finished second or not.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like being harsh on players. They're obviously not rubbish because they're professional footballers, right? And they've earned the right to earn a living and be at the top of the game. And I suppose you don't win Cup Winners' Cup finals against Real Madrid and get signed for Manchester United if you're a not very good player. But I just seemed with every goal he let in that season, he just dropped lower and lower and lower his confidence. And I think by the final, I think he was dragging along the floor, because even in the semi-final, the 3-3 game against Oldham, some of the goals we conceded were horrendous. And it just seemed that every attack that a team would have on us would near enough end up in a goal. A bit like today, really.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are some. It's worth spending a moment on this, because some goalkeepers just kind of brush off the mistakes, and some can't. And we have one these days in Andrea Nana who seems to take it to heart in a very Jim Leighton fashion. I mean, every mistake that Leighton made seemed to crush his confidence and crush Ferguson's confidence. I mean, Ferguson destroyed him, basically dropping him for the replay, but it just seemed to impact Leighton so much. And throughout that game, he's clearly got the yips, right? And Palace knew it.
Absolutely. I mean, the review I read when Crystal Palace played Liverpool in the semi-final, Steve Coppell had said to the Crystal Palace players that we are gonna launch long balls into the box under the crossbar of Bruce Grobbelaar, and we're going to get around him, and we're going to make ourselves a nuisance. Set plays, throw-ins, etc. And the first goal against us in the final against Palace was a free kick from the right-hand side, swung in under the crossbar. Leighton started to come, didn't. The defenders looped it up over his head, and Steve Bruce tries to clear it off the line, and invariably kicks it against Leighton into the roof of the net. Yeah. And I think that goal, if you actually watch that goal a couple of times, that goal sums up his Manchester United career, I think.
Yeah. No, it's really a real calamity and sets the tone for the game. And you do wonder if Ferguson had the option of swapping him out there and then, whether he wouldn't have done it. I mean, obviously he couldn't, but you don't get the 97 subs that you get today.
No, I mean, it's strange because I wasn't old enough then to sort of realise how squads worked and things like that. But you couldn't imagine a manager changing the goalkeeper now. Mm-hmm. In them days, a goalkeeper would be the number one goalkeeper and they would play every single game unless they got injured, and that was the end of it. But now it seems, in this day and age, it seems a lot more acceptable. Goalkeepers play cup games and lower league opposition and stuff like that. But back then it was you've got the one on the back, so you are my number one, and that's how it's going to stay. So it obviously the replay when he dropped Leighton for Les Sheely, who'd only made a couple of appearances a few months earlier, was I would imagine at the time would have been like news at 10 stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, just a huge bombshell, and Leslie hadn't had a career of any kind of note, really, up to that point. It's not as if he was a top keeper that Ferguson had brought in. He was the backup. He may have even come on a free transfer. I can't remember. It was Luton, I think he came from.
Yeah, he was on loan at the time, yeah.
On loan, yeah. Oh, there you go. So, yeah, just a huge bombshell to drop him for the replay. And, of course, Leighton never made it back. Leslie was the number one for the whole of the following season and the Cup Winners' Cup run. And a real character, I mean, R.I.P., no longer with us, of course.
Absolutely, yeah.
A real character, like almost the opposite personality to Jim Leighton, like effervescent, confident, loud, outgoing. Not that I've met him, but that
was how he seemed, yeah.
That's how he seemed, yeah. And just this is Ferguson as well, isn't it? He's Ferguson the gambler, which I don't think he's ever given it. I mean, like, it's ridiculous to say. He's not given enough credit, but for the risks he always took.
Yeah,
making these kind of bold decisions.
Yeah, that, like I say, could you imagine social media now? If social media was around back then and breaking news an hour before kickoff was the goalkeeper who's played for the last 10 years under the manager has been dropped for someone who played twice, it would absolutely go into meltdown.
Oh, it goes into meltdown if there's a transfer story from some random website that no one's ever heard of. And yeah. Yeah, well, look, even at the time, I mean, you talk in the book about Gary Pallister's struggles in the first half of that season and how the fans were kind of getting on his back, and he was getting used to the environment around United and the scrutiny. And Ron Atkinson, before that, you talk about surprised by just how much pressure there was. We talked about the Knighton takeover and how it was just kind of a media circus. That was on the news at 10, like every day, talk of Manchester United's takeover. So even then, the entire country's media was focused on United, but yeah, nothing compared to today, where you have news socials, a million websites, twats on podcasters, podcasts like me criticizing, and the players on social media as well, soaking it all up, which I don't think it does them any good, as we've seen in recent weeks. Yeah. So just incredible pressure when on the players when it come to the replay. So it's 3-3 in the final. United kept themselves in it. Obviously, Ian Wright scored twice in that first game. Come to the final, big bombshell news is that Leslie's in for Jim Leighton, and perhaps the player that no one is looking at or thinking about or really focused on at all, because it was young players, Lee Martin, who had a kind of interesting career. I mean, he managed to play sort of 70 odd times for United and then went on to other teams, and wasn't a stellar career by any means, but was a career. But no one was talking about Lee Martin as the key player in this United side.
No, he was definitely one of the unlikeliest heroes, especially after the first game. Crystal Palace had, Ian Wright come off the bench and scored twice and grabbed lines. Mark Hughes has scored twice. Brian Robson, England captain, has scored. So you've got all these big names scoring in finals, like they should do, really, on the big occasions. But then in the semi-final, just completely overshadowed by young Lee Martin, who's been in the first team for around 18 months, probably played about 30, 40 times roughly. And then all of a sudden, comes up with the winning goal that sort of changes the course of history in the modern day of Manchester United.
Yeah, and I definitely want to get onto that and some of all that context around it. I mean, the goal itself, it's a brilliant ball from Neil Webb, the sort of crossfield ball. It's the hamstring injury that Webb got playing for England. I think it was against Sweden or something like that, where he's jumped up for a ball and his hamstring snapped. I think that changed his career, because he was a sort of classy midfielder, great passing range that we see for that goal. He hits that 60-yard ball to Lee Martin. But after the injury, he was just kind of a bit slow, I think.
Well, he when he done his hamstring, he ruptured his Achilles as well, didn't he? And I don't think he was ever the same after.
No.
He's a postman now, so I wonder if he's as quick on his rounds as what he was getting around our midfield.
Wasn't very quick, yeah.
But like you say, he scored on his debut in the opening game of the season when we played Arsenal.
Yeah.
And then obviously we missed him for so much of the season. One of his first games back, I think it might have even been his first game back, him and Brian Robson both played in the first leg of the 3-3 draw of the semi-final against Oldham. And I think they'd both been missing for about 6 months roughly. And I think Mike Phelan won the ball with a tackle, and it just went straight to Webb, who controlled it with his first touch, and his second touch plays it through to the path of Robson, who runs through and equalises. But obviously the goal that Lee Martin scores, like you say, is from a 60-yard raking ball from sort of down near the right-hand touchline. And it's just that quality, which obviously Alex Ferguson signs from Nottingham Forest, to turn us from Brian Robson's the engine room and Paul Ince, to do the dirty work, and you're signing that player to link all this up together. But when he hasn't played for 7-8 months, obviously there's a big miss, a big hole in your midfield, which then showed in the final is quality for the goal, because that's a very, very underrated assist.
Yeah, no, it won't go down as one of the all-time FA Cup final goals, but it should be pretty high up there, because it's a brilliant assist and a great finish from Lee Martin as well. All right, let's go into some of the wider context. So we talked about the pressure on Fergie, and Martin Edwards has always denied that this saved his job, either the Forest game or just the cup final generally. He's just always denied it. But Ferguson talked about it. And I think you've got some of the quotes in the book as well, where he talks about how important both the Forest game was and the start of that cup run, but winning the the trophy was. So how do you set it in context? Like, how important was this cup final win for Ferguson saving his time at United? Or, what could have been if he had gone?
I mean, if we look at it, I mean, we can only look at it the way that we've seen it now, which they went on to unprecedented success, which, you know, you couldn't have imagined what would have followed in the next 20 seasons. Like, if someone wrote a story and said to a producer, this is the story, they would have binned it and said, no one will believe that. That's ridiculous, right? Pack it in. But we did. So, but had United have crashed out, lost the final or crashed out in the second round against Hereford, or I believe he would not have lasted the season. He probably would have lasted another couple of league games. The league form didn't really upturn until I think after the Sheffield United game. We were sort of still winning in the cup, but we hadn't won a league game between November and March. Sort of a 20 game or whatever it was, sort of run without a win. So yeah, I believe he wouldn't have seen the season out, and then we don't know where we'd have gone from there. Could have gone, yeah, we could. I don't know. I don't know at the time, because I was only young, so I don't really know at the time who potentially they'd have brought in.
Yeah,
I think I read reports that they looked at Howard Kendall, but he ended up going to Man City. And Terry Venables, but he was sort of flirting with Spurs and just come back from Barcelona. So yeah, so it was, yeah, it's a strange. Obviously, they'd have got someone, but yeah, I mean, we could have gone another 15, 20 years without winning a league title.
Yep, there's a sliding doors moment, isn't it? And it could have changed the club completely. I mean, Venables would have brought gravitas and a good playing style to the club. Howard Kendall would not have, I would suggest. Had fine career at Everton and all of that. Who knows? But yeah, you also talked to Peter Molly, who famously had the Tara Fergie banner out. He's never. I don't know whether he would see it. I mean, I don't know him, so tell me, how does he see that banner now? I mean, because it's a claim to fame as such, or he's never lived it down.
Well, I spoke to it. I managed to find him on social media a long time ago, because I was doing various sort of articles that I was writing online and bits and pieces, and he wrote his own book, which was Tara Fergie, and then it was, basically how he, a bit sort of similar to mine, how he tells a story of how he followed Manchester United as a kid, for 3 decades, and enough was enough, and he unfurled the banner, and then obviously everything that followed after. But yeah, he obviously met Alex Ferguson at a later date, who very sheepishly said, yes, it was me that sort of started the sort of unrest against you to a point. But look, people are entitled to, they pay their money, they're entitled to their opinion on match day, or, it's our own. That's part of the course. But no, I think he's quite proud, embarrassed. I don't know. I'm assuming he's part of Manchester United's history now.
Oh yeah. He's a good part of the culture and the history of United. I mean, it's a great anecdote in the book that he took the banner to a few games.
Yeah,
and nearly pulled out against Crystal Palace, I think, in one of the league games, and then he took it to Chelsea.
No, the Palace game was the
one he came out. Yeah.
All
right.
He said Chelsea was. I think he played Nottingham Forest on Remembrance Day, in the November, and he said he didn't want to do it on that day because obviously it was that day. And then we played Chelsea at home the next time, and he said he didn't want to do it in front of like a rival. And then obviously the Palace game, and when Mark Bright scored twice, that was the start of the winter of discontent, really.
Yeah. And look, it wasn't him alone, but it was obviously a very visible public display of discontent. But the football was crap. There'd been 3 years of not particularly impressive results. That second place in Ferguson's first year looked out of place really in terms of like the actual quality of football that was on display, and it was hard to see the light of the tunnel at the end of the tunnel. And so there was discontent. Not today is very different because I think everything's amplified by social media, right? And so it's very quick.
Yeah,
it's very quick for people to feel angry, and whereas fan culture was very much based around going to games in 1990, whereas it's much more dispersed and spread. I mean, you can see this by the reaction in Old Trafford to the results, which is super supportive. I mean, when there are boos, it's a big moment.
Yeah.
Versus online fan culture, which is 95% negative most of the time.
Well, I'm as a Manchester United fan, I'm quite proud that we very rarely boo at Old Trafford.
Yeah.
If it's deserved. I mean, there was a few times last season when they got booed off at the pitch, and the manager turned around and said, "Well, yeah, we deserve it. We were rubbish." And I think that's right, but we don't generally do it. We tend to back our own and support. I mean, if you read all the comments on social media, you think we're the worst club that's ever kicked a ball, the way that people go on, but we're not. So it's just there's a lot of doom mongers about. I mean, but yeah, as a club, we do tend to support rather than not. But then there's always going to be, in a small portion of a large crowd, there's always going to be people that aren't happy. Like I say, they pay the money, they're welcome to their own opinion.
Oh, sure. I mean, we've all sat. I mean, I had a few different season tickets around Old Trafford, and I was sat in the North Stand for a while with a very vocal Mona behind me all the time, even during the good years. So yeah, we all know that one. Well, Peter Molyneux has his time. I think good for him. Yeah, I was once dumb enough in 2005. I kind of got egged on by the Guardian. I wrote a piece calling for Fergie's head. I was really angry with his position on the Glazers. Thankfully, that's not that public because it was hidden in the Guardian somewhere, so no one ever remembers it, which is great. In the process of researching this book and watching the games and writing it, did it change your opinion of any of the players at the club at the time?
In what sense?
Well, for better or worse, or forgotten figures.
I mean, if you went through the sort of the squad off the top of my head, obviously goalkeeping department was sparse. We had Jim Leighton. I think Gary Walsh was injured at the time and was only young. They had Mark Crossley on loan for a bit on trial from Forest. Les Seeley on loan, so that wasn't great. It was a bit of a Achilles heel for the team. Steve Bruce and Gary Pallister had just been brought in, so for record
first season together, yeah.
So they were sort of finding their feet. Fullbacks, we had Viv Anderson, who was probably about 200 by then. He'd been around a long time, sort of in the twilight of his career. And Lee Martin, on the other hand, was coming through very, very young. Yeah, so we had injuries as well. Mal Donaghy was sort of in and around the team, sort of in and out. We had Colin Gibson, was it? The other fullback, the left back?
Yeah.
He was injured. He'd been out for 18 months. So, there was sort of a bit of a hole there. And then sort of going into midfield, you had Mike Phelan, who was captain of Norwich. They signed, that was a sort of a pretty stable signing. Norwich were doing well in the 80s. They were sort of a good League Cup side and whatnot. Paul Ince was up and coming, West Ham, young, energetic midfielder. Mm-hmm. But you didn't really see the best of Ince probably until the Premier League years, I'd suggest.
I think so. I think it took him a while to grow into the team, yeah, for what he was. And he was young this season. Yeah, he was young.
His first couple of seasons were he was very erratic in his form, I would suggest, and obviously grew into his role by the time sort of around 93, 94 come about. Like Brian Robson injured a lot. that season, coming off the back of a season where he'd sort of done all right, and then picked up another early injury and curtailed him, and Neil Webb again. So there was sort of new players coming in, finding their feet, players that you wanted to carry the team getting injured. So when you do actually look back, there's a lot of moving parts there of a team that's trying to find its feet and gel.
Yeah.
So it's sort of similar to how the United team finished last season, but with a new manager coming in with sort of new systems and ideas. But no sort of players that made me think, oh, I can't remember him being that bad, really. I just think the team were absolutely shot to death of any confidence. Every game was a loss or a draw in the league, so they couldn't get any momentum going at all. I think they only won back-to-back games 2 or 3 times in the whole season.
Yeah. I mean, there's resonance with today in terms of results, at least. Yeah, I mean, you can kind of see the genesis of a good team coming through. So I think next season didn't he sign Dennis Irwin and Paul Parker? Is that in the same time? I remember that correctly.
Yeah. Paul Parker straight off the back of the World Cup in Italia 90 from QPR, and Dennis Irwin off the back of them 2 semi-finals, I would suggest.
Yeah, well, that's right. Went on to become, I would argue, the greatest fullback in the club's history. That's a good argument, though. So maybe for another day. But Dennis Irwin, just perfect player, faultless. And then he signs McClare to add goals. He came as a striker from Celtic, but turned into a midfielder in his sort of later days, kind of almost after Cantona joined a couple of years later, I think. And so the genesis of a good side, but not showing it. Injuries robbed the club of the team of 2 of their best players and more. It's an unfair sort of counterfactual, but if United hadn't won that FA Cup, but Ferguson had stayed, does the team go on to achieve the things? Because winning in Rotterdam, the Cup Winners' Cup final against Barcelona, Ferguson's talked about that as a real springboard. Confidence, knew they were champions, had beaten one of Europe's best. Well, supposedly Barcelona win the Champions League in '92, so, or the European Cup as it was probably called then, I think. And so he talks about it. So, without that cup final win, even if he'd stayed, it might have taken a few more years to get to where we were. We had the 92 season, lost out to Leeds. That's when my mum started letting me go to everything. So I did on the coach, everywhere around the country. Yeah, it was great. Some devastating loss to West Ham at the end of that season.
Yeah.
They locked us in at Upton Park. I still remember that one like it was yesterday. And I still hate West Ham as a result. It's good. It's good. So, I mean, it did accelerate Ferguson's project, this win. And I think that's how important it was.
So we're probably thinking if he'd have got to the final and lost, he probably would have kept his job then, because they would have seen there was something building there. But
I think just the way that Edwards talks about it, he doesn't entertain the idea and this may be his public facing part about it. He just doesn't entertain the idea that they were ever thinking of firing Ferguson.
Again, maybe they just looked around at the time and thought there wasn't anyone that was what they thought any better at the time.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to replace a manager, 9 times out of 10, you want someone coming in that you ideally think is going to do a better job.
Well, that's the point.
Yeah. So if you haven't got someone lined up that you think's actually going to do a better job, then what's the point? Then I guess that's why they stuck with him. Or we don't know. We'll never know, I guess.
It's great entertainment. It's great nostalgia porn, as I said, going through this season. Just as I said, it's the pivot point between the cusp of the end of the Ferguson era and the beginning of the era of success. And so we can certainly see it, even if Edwards denies it was ever the chance. So you can see it as the springboard for what came next. Do you have other projects? You're thinking about your next book?
No, that's me done for a minute, mate. I've done 4 in the last few years, so just having a bit of a rest. Been sat at a laptop permanently for since COVID, so
Yeah,
no, I'm having a bit of a break now.
good.
I mean, this was the reason why, because this is my 4th book now, and the first 3, none of them were about Manchester United, although Manchester United feature in one of the chapters of my first books. But I left it so late of doing the Manchester United one because everything's been written about so many times to an extent. So it's hard to, like I said earlier, find a bit of a niche gap in the market where people aren't just like, oh, it's another history book, or oh, it's another, I mean, you said the other day you had Wayne Barton on, and I think he's single-handedly nearly covering every single angle and base of Manchester United's publications that he can, and brilliantly so as well, I might add. And I was very lucky enough to have him on my forward for this book, so I was
Yeah,
very, very, very grateful with that.
yeah, he churns them out. He's regular on the pod. Yeah, and I don't know whether we did a series called The Lost Tapes together, which was a pure nostalgia from some of the tapes he had from the BBC, which was great fun. We didn't cover 89, 90, except for the Knighton thing, but there's plenty to dig into there. I wonder if there's some audio with Mark Robbins would be interesting. Robbins had an interesting career because, I mean, he didn't last that much longer at United after this. He scored some important goals, but never really established himself as the main man, but has ended up becoming a really fine manager in the Championship. I mean, he's managed to get success pretty much everywhere he's managed, including nearly against us.
That season, he scored quite a few goals coming off the bench, and even started a few games, scoring a few. But just he just never quite got the. I think Brian McClare was Alex Ferguson's sort of. He just did. He must have been a good bloke in the changing room, good at training. To be fair, he was a very good player for us. Like you say, started off playing as a striker and sort of just ever so slightly started dropping back into sort of behind Mark Hughes and then sort of back into midfield a little bit later on. But he never let us down. I thought he was a fantastic player, and Mark Hughes, he doesn't need an introduction for how good he was, especially for big games as well. He was a really big game player. So it would have been exceptionally hard for Robbins to break in on a week in, week out basis. Although he had a cracking career when he went to Norwich City after, and I think he scored about 20 goals in their debut Premier League season
Yeah.
when they finished third. I think he was instrumental in that. But yeah, and then going on to management, taking Coventry City from the bottoms of the Football League and to being a VAR decision away from knocking us out in the FA Cup 2 years ago.
Toenails worth. Well, it's a nice bookend to the story, isn't it? Well, it would have been a very nice bookend to the story for him. Thankfully not. Sorry, Mark. John McNicholl, thank you very much. Wem-ber-lee is out now. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Congratulations, and I appreciate you coming on the pod.
Cheers, Ed. Thanks for having me.